Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. The chamber stretched vast and endless, its towering ceilings vanishing into a thick, violet haze. The air shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, a silent language exchanged among the delegates seated in curved tiers around the central dais. Their forms varied wildly. Some were towering and gaunt, their elongated limbs folded with eerie stillness, while others were squat and bristling with spines, their many eyes glinting in the dim glow. Some did not even have physical forms at all, existing instead as shifting specters of energy, their thoughts pulsing in synchronized waves. Here, in this gathering of the Galactic Kanzi, the fate of civilizations had been decided for eons. Today, the subject of deliberation was Earth, a single, fragile world, trembling on the precipice of relevance. The one who spoke first was Sektal, the Zelnari representative. His silvered skin reflected the low light, making him appear almost sculpted from molten metal. Tall and sinewy, his species had long been the architects of destruction, their expertise in preemptive warfare unmatched. He moved with the calculated precision of a being accustomed to command. "We have observed long enough," he announced, his voice smooth, but carrying the weight of an unsheathed blade. "This species has outgrown its ignorance. They probe the void, sending crude signals, like blind insects tapping against glass, unaware of what lurks beyond. They fashion weapons that could, in time, stretch beyond their own system. Their kind has no restraint, no temperance. They war with themselves even as they dream of the stars. It is not a question of if they will become a threat, but when." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber, not spoken, but felt. The council did not communicate through mere words. Thought waves and frequency pulses carried their emotions like shifting tides, invisible yet undeniable. Concern, curiosity, skepticism, each sentiment flickered across the assembly in subtle waves. A voice, synthetic yet eerily human, followed. "Your concern is noted," said Zephyr, the representative of the Myriad Cluster, a collective of machine intelligences that had long surpassed their organic origins. Though his form was sleek and devoid of unnecessary embellishments, his presence commanded attention. Yet premature eradication lacks elegance. His luminous optics flickered, scanning the assembled council. "We do not cull species based on potential alone. To do so would be inefficient, wasteful." Sektal's gaze locked onto Zephyr, his slitted pupils narrowing. "Potential is precisely the reason we should act," he countered. "They are violent, territorial, unpredictable. Their history is a cycle of war and conquest, an unbroken chain of destruction. What reason do we have to believe they will not carry that nature with them when they finally breach interstellar space?" A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the delegates, but it was not universal. Others remained motionless, waiting. There were always those who argued for annihilation, just as there were those who argued for patience. This debate had played out before, across countless cycles, for countless species. Some civilizations had been spared. Others had been erased, their stars left to burn over barren, silent worlds. Then a voice, deeper and more deliberate, cut through the discourse like the grinding of tectonic plates. "Perhaps you assume too much." All turned to Yeruk, the Valzar emissary. His kind did not move with haste, nor did they speak without purpose. He unfolded his dark, chitinous frame with slow, deliberate precision, his many eyes unreadable. His species had seen the rise and fall of empires older than most could fathom. They had survived the purges, the wars, the silent extinctions that had claimed so many others. They did not act on fear. "You see their wars, their aggression," Yeruk continued, his tone measured, each syllable weighted. "You assume this defines them. But I have observed another trait, one rarer among the cosmos than violence." Sektal's jaw tightened, his mandibles clicking together softly. "And what noble quality is that?" he asked, his tone edged with skepticism. Yarek's compound eyes gleamed with something unreadable. Defiance. The chamber stilled. The silence was not mere absence of sound. It was an expectation, a collective inhale. Yarek spoke again, unhurried. Many species, when faced with insurmountable odds, surrender. They submit to stronger forces. They accept the weight of inevitability. It is the logical course of action. Survival, at the cost of dignity, is the instinct of the weak. Yet humans fight. Even when logic dictates otherwise, even when defeat is certain, they resist. It is not mere survival instinct. It is something else. A refusal to be controlled. A refusal to accept their own limits. Some of the delegates exchanged glances, those who possessed eyes at least. Others pulsed with low, thoughtful frequencies, their collective consciousness processing Yarek's words. Zephyr's luminous optics dimmed momentarily as he processed the claim. And you consider this an asset? Yarek's voice remained steady. I consider it a warning. A subtle shift coursed through the assembly. Tension, calculation, the weight of unspoken possibilities. If we strike them down now, while they're still climbing, we will assume the threat is gone, Yarek continued. But the embers of a fire do not forget how to burn. If wiped from existence, their memory will not fade. It will spread. Perhaps not in a millennium or 10, but in time, some distant intelligence will learn of their destruction. And that intelligence will ask, who did this? And they will come for us. Sectal's fingers curled into his palm. His form remained still, but the anger in his voice was a barely veiled snarl. You propose, then, that we do nothing? No. Yarek's answer was simple, unshaken. We watch. We test. We learn what they will become, instead of fearing what they might. The chamber did not erupt in immediate agreement, nor did it descend into further argument. Instead, the delegates remained still, processing the implications. The decision would not be made in haste. It never was. But something had shifted, an intangible turning point. Humanity had not yet earned its place among the stars, but neither had it sealed its doom. The transmission had traveled far, farther than any human mind could grasp, slipping through the great cosmic web like a thread unwinding across eternity. It moved unseen, undetected by the species that had unknowingly sent it, yet it did not go unnoticed. Something ancient had been listening, something patient, and now something had answered. Earth did not stir. Cities continued their ceaseless hum of movement. Satellites drifted in their endless orbits, blind to the whisper that had threaded itself between their signals. No one noticed. No one, except a machine. A simple algorithm buried deep within a forgotten server in the southernmost reaches of New Zealand, where the nights stretched long and the skies remained unpolluted by human ambition. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than an anomaly filter, a line of code meant to discard meaningless signals, to sift the sky's endless noise from anything resembling order. Yet that night it hesitated. A sequence had appeared, too structured, too deliberate. It flagged the data, compiled the sequence, and sent it where all impossible things went, to Dr. Elias Verne. Elias had spent most of his career wrestling with the silence of space. He had listened for years, scanning frequencies that yielded nothing but the faint echoes of dying stars and the cold radiation of the past. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence had, in the eyes of most, become a fool's errand, a game played by those unwilling to accept that the universe, in all its vastness, might still be empty. Elias did not believe that. Silence was never proof of absence. It was proof that no one had been asking the right question. And now, something was knocking. The message was buried beneath radiation and distortion, as if layered in time itself. It pulsed in intervals, its rhythm too intentional for nature. Elias stared at the screen, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He ran the sequence again, filtering out interference, stripping away the cosmic dust that had settled over its edges. The pattern sharpened, clearer now. Not a fragment of random noise. A design, a structure, a message. The realization coiled around his spine like an electric current. This was not a natural occurrence. It was not human. He should have reported it immediately. Protocol demanded it. He should have flagged it, sent it to the higher-ups, let someone with authority decide what to do. But he didn't move. He barely breathed. If he spoke the words aloud, if he acknowledged what was in front of him, it would become real. Instead, he reached out, his fingers hovering over the controls, uncertain. The signal played again. The same sequence. No variation. No randomness. It was waiting. Elias swallowed. Every rational thought told him to stop, to take a step back, to let someone else make the call. And yet, against reason, against protocol, against the years of skepticism that had whittled his faith to its barest thread, he answered. Not with words, there were none that could be spoken. Instead, he sent a response in the only language that could bridge the impossible distance between them. A pulse, a pattern, a call back into the void. The signal ceased. A minute passed, then another. The room felt unbearably small, as if the air had thickened, pressing in around him. The monitor remained unchanged. No response, no acknowledgement. Had he imagined it? Had the years of silence finally driven him to see ghosts where none existed? Then the screen flickered. The signal returned. Not a repetition, a variation, a response. His breath caught. This was real. He was not imagining it. Somewhere far beyond the solar system, something had heard him. And now, something was answering. Unbeknownst to him, across the cold expanse of space, in a chamber older than the histories of most known worlds, unseen eyes turned toward Earth with renewed interest. The Galactic Kanzi, long patient in its observations, had been waiting for this moment. Orders were given. The next phase had begun. The sky above the research facility stretched in an unbroken canvas of early dawn, streaked with fragile gold, where the first light touched the horizon. Elias stood at the window, his coffee cold in his hands, staring past the rolling hills toward the sea. The world remained unchanged, blissfully unaware of what had happened the night before. But he knew. A signal had come from the depths of space, deliberate and structured, breaking the silence of the cosmos. It had not been a mistake, nor a natural anomaly. Something, someone, had answered. He had barely slept. The night had been spent rerunning the data, searching for an error, something to ground him in reality. But the numbers held. The signal was no accident. The universe had, for the first time, spoken back. A voice in his mind whispered caution. It wasn't just the discovery itself that unsettled him. It was what came next. Humanity had spent centuries yearning for contact, but never asking what might happen if it truly occurred. The search for intelligence had always been framed as a hopeful endeavor, a romantic pursuit of knowledge and connection. But the universe was not a novel. It was cold, vast, and ancient. Contact meant risk. He set the coffee down and turned to his console, fingers hovering over the keys. His first instinct had been to tell someone. The weight of the discovery was too much to bear alone, but a sliver of doubt coiled in his mind. Once the truth was released, he would lose control of it. It would become the property of governments, institutions, people with their own motives. Yet he couldn't keep it to himself. His hesitation lasted only a moment before he reached for his phone. There was one person he trusted. The call rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. Elias? What the hell? It's a pause. A shuffle of movement. Wait, what time is it? Elias exhaled, steadying himself. Raj, I need you to look at something. A sigh. You're asking me that before coffee? Just trust me. There was a rustle of sheets, followed by the sound of a laptop powering on. What am I looking at? I think we just made first contact. Silence. Then slower, more awake. Elias, what did you do? Elias ignored the question and forwarded the data. Check your email. I ran it through every filter. It's not interference. It's not a pulsar. And it's not random. He hesitated, struggling for the right word. It's waiting for us. Raj was quiet for a long time. Then a muttered curse. I see it. Elias leaned forward, watching the pulse of the transmission as it continued on his screen. Tell me I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. Raj's voice had lost all trace of fatigue. But this, Elias, if this is real, we can't be the only ones looking at it. If your system picked it up, Others might have too. Who else have you told? No one, Elias admitted. Not yet. Good. Because if you're right, and this is some kind of intelligence reaching out, we have no idea what's about to happen. As if in response, the signal changed. Elias's breath hitched. Raj, it just evolved. What do you mean evolved? He typed frantically, isolating the new structure. The original rhythm had shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. It was no longer just a response. It was a message. The hair on the back of his neck rose. I think it's testing us. Raj's voice came back, quieter. Then let's hope we don't fail. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, far beyond Earth's atmosphere, something else had stirred. Within the vast halls of the Galactic Kanzi, unseen eyes observed, calculating, deciding. Orders were issued, not of war, not yet, but of observation. Intervention, if necessary. The test had begun. The night had settled heavily over the research facility, thick with silence, save for the occasional rustling of wind through the trees. Elias sat motionless before the monitor, the glow of the screen carving shadows into the hollows beneath his eyes. The signal pulsed steadily, its rhythm now more intricate, layered, as though it had been waiting for him to notice its next move. He had spent the last hour analyzing the shift, cross-referencing it against every known astronomical phenomenon, every recorded anomaly. It didn't fit. It wasn't cosmic radiation, wasn't interference, wasn't a misplaced transmission from some distant satellite. It was precise. It was deliberate. It was, in every measurable way, intelligent. Raj was still on the other end of the call, his voice hushed, words careful. It's a pattern, but not just a pattern. It's an escalation. Elias pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaustion settling in like lead behind his eyes. It's testing us, he murmured, seeing if we recognize the shift. If that's the case, Raj said, then the real question is, what happens if we don't respond? Elias hesitated. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, mind racing through possibilities. There was no precedent for this. Humanity had spent decades sending signals into the void, hopeful whispers into a silent abyss. But no one had ever prepared for a response. We respond, Elias said finally, voice quiet but firm. And if we're walking into something we don't understand. Elias exhaled slowly. Then at least we're walking forward. He adjusted the parameters, carefully crafting a reply. His own sequence of pulses, mimicking the structure of the incoming signal, but adding slight deviations, an attempt to introduce something new into the conversation. A test of his own. He pressed send. For a moment, nothing happened. The signal remained unchanged, unwavering, as though considering his response. Then the screen flickered. The transmission altered again. Elias's breath caught. It wasn't just responding. It was learning. Raj let out a low whistle. This just went from we found something to it found us. Elias barely heard him. His mind was spinning, every rational part of him trying to make sense of what was unfolding in front of him. This wasn't just contact. This was communication, dynamic and adaptive. And then the signal did something new. It stopped. The steady rhythm, the pulsing pattern gone. For the first time since he had detected it, there was nothing. Just an empty screen and the quiet hum of the lab. The silence that followed was unbearable. Raj's voice came over the line, careful, measured. Elias? I don't know, Elias admitted. His hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to do. I think we... The lights flickered. Elias straightened. A tremor ran through his monitor, the display momentarily distorting before stabilizing again. Every screen in the lab dimmed for a fraction of a second, then returned to normal. Outside, in the distance, the hum of the backup generator kicked in, faint but unmistakable. Elias, Raj said, voice suddenly sharper. Tell me that was just on your end. Elias's heart pounded. It wasn't. Raj cursed under his breath. Something just hit the global comms network. Satellites flickered, minor outages, barely a blip, but it's there. I just lost remote access to the main observatory feeds for a few seconds. Elias stared at the screen, at the blank space where the signal had been. Tell me that's a coincidence. Raj was silent for a long moment. I don't believe in coincidences anymore." The weight of those words settled between them. Elias swallowed hard. Then we're not just receiving a message. Raj exhaled. No, we're in a conversation. And far beyond the quiet research facility, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the reach of human understanding, something watched. The test had changed. Humanity had answered. Now I would see if they could keep up. The moment the power flickered, Elias knew they were no longer just observers. They had been noticed. He sat rigid in his chair, eyes locked on the darkened screen. The signal had vanished. No trace, no lingering echoes in the data, just an empty silence stretching across the digital void. It was as if it had never been there at all. Raj was still on the line, his voice tight. "Elias, talk to me." Elias forced his mind to focus. He checked the instruments. No damage, no system failures. The facility's emergency protocols had kicked in seamlessly. The blackout had lasted mere seconds, but that was long enough. "The lab's fine," Elias said, his voice steadier than he felt. "No surges, no equipment failure. It's like something reached in, pressed pause, and let go." Raj hesitated. "You think it was them?" Elias stared at the screen, at the empty space where the transmission had been. "I don't think anything anymore." "I know." He pulled up the satellite feeds, scanning for anomalies. If something had interfered with communications worldwide, there had to be a record, a distortion, a spike in electromagnetic activity. The data scrolled across the screen in a blur of numbers and timestamps, his pulse quickening as he found it. "There," he muttered. Raj was silent for a second before exhaling sharply. "Jesus, that's intentional," Elias finished. A disruption, subtle but precise. A fraction of a second where the usual background noise of the universe had dipped, as if something vast had shifted, briefly altering the fabric of their reality before settling once more. Raj let out a low breath. "This isn't just a test, Elias. It's a demonstration." Elias's fingers tightened against the desk. They wanted us to know. He felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Contact had always been a hypothetical, a question with no promise of an answer. Humanity had spent decades shouting into the abyss, never truly expecting a reply. And now, not only had someone answered, they had reached back, touched the fabric of human existence, and with terrifying ease, shown just how easily they could disrupt it. "They didn't attack," Raj said. "If they had, we wouldn't be talking." Elias nodded absently. It was a message, not an act of war. But a message from who? And why? A new thought surfaced, one that sent a chill curling up his spine. "They wanted to see how we'd react," he murmured. Raj didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was cautious. "And how do we?" Elias leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. The weight of the moment pressed against him. Every decision from here mattered. Every step forward would define what came next. His mind drifted back to the old arguments, the endless debates in scientific circles about the nature of first contact. The theories had varied wildly. Some believed any advanced civilization would be benevolent, reaching out with open hands. Others feared the opposite, that any intelligence capable of reaching the stars would view lesser species as expendable, obstacles to be swept aside. But no one had considered this. A test, a quiet assertion of power, given without hostility but with unmistakable weight. Elias inhaled slowly. "We respond," he said finally, "but not in fear, not as if we're submitting." Raj let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You say that like you know what the hell they want from us." "I don't," Elias admitted, "but I don't think this is about what they want. I think it's about what we are." Raj was quiet for a long moment. Then, "So what do we show them?" Elias stared at the screen, the words forming before he fully understood them himself. "That we're listening, and somewhere beyond the reach of human eyes, in a place where time and space bent differently, the watchers observed, calculating, waiting." The test was far from over. The night stretched endlessly over the research facility, a vast expanse of darkness broken only by the soft glow of Elias's monitor. He had spent hours staring at the empty screen, waiting for something, anything, to return. The signal had vanished, but its presence lingered, a ghost pressing against the edges of his mind. Raj had gone silent on the other end of the call, but Elias could still hear his breathing, steady and pensive. They both knew the weight of what had just happened. A force beyond their comprehension had reached into their world, altered it for a fleeting moment, and then receded. Not an attack, not a warning, a test. And now, humanity stood at the threshold, waiting for the next move. Elias flexed his fingers, his muscles tight from hours of stillness. We have to assume they're still watching. Raj's voice was quiet, thoughtful. They could be light years away. We could be waiting a lifetime for a response. Elias shook his head. No, this wasn't distant. Whatever they did, it happened instantly on a planetary scale. They're close. A long pause. Then, Raj exhaled. So what now? Elias hesitated. Every choice from this moment forward would ripple outward, shaping humanity's first real step into the unknown. Responding had been instinctive before, driven by curiosity. Now it was something more. He began typing, crafting another message. This time, there would be no patterns, no mimicry. Just a single statement, sent in the simplest way possible. A pulse of data encoded with meaning. We are listening. We are ready. He pressed send. The lab fell into stillness. Seconds stretched into minutes. The hum of the equipment, the distant rustling of trees outside. It all seemed muted, swallowed by the gravity of the moment. Then, without warning, the screen flickered. Elias's pulse spiked. Raj, I see it. The signal returned, but it was different now. No longer a test of recognition. No longer a challenge wrapped in mathematics. It was precise. It was structured. And for the first time, it wasn't just a pattern. It was language. The symbols spilled across the screen, strange yet methodical. Elias barely breathed as he recorded every fragment, running decryption protocols even as his mind raced ahead. Raj muttered, "They're not waiting anymore." Elias didn't respond. His fingers moved instinctively, analyzing, breaking the message down into something decipherable. And then, slowly, understanding settled in. The message contained no threats, no demands, no warnings. A simple declaration, written in the fabric of a civilization far older than their own. You are seen. You are considered. Prepare. Elias leaned back, his heart pounding. Raj, I know. This was it. The test was over, and humanity had passed. Far beyond the reach of Earth, within the chambers of the Galactic Kanzi, the decision had already been made. The Watchers had debated, calculated, weighed the possibilities. There had been doubts. There had been those who argued against it. But one truth had become undeniable. Humanity did not submit. It did not cower. It reached back into the void and refused to be insignificant. And so, for the first time, Earth was no longer just a world on the edge of observation. It was a world that had been chosen. Contact was coming, and nothing would ever be the same.